basically what Julius has said is, can traits arise that are beneficial to the group despite being maladaptive to individuals and other kin and their kin? Explain group selection, explain how genius genes are spread. Oh, that's a very interesting one. I'll tell you how it works. This is the theory that I've developed. Basically, genius is a bit odd because genius doesn't breed true. It's a product of a sort of contingent coupling of different genetic variants, which have a very, very low probability of being found in the same individual at any given point in time. And so there's a lot of luck involved in whether you get the right genetic elements sort of coming together to give rise to the genius. And actually, Eysenck, in his book, his 1995 book, which was called, originally enough, Genius, identified 12 such traits. And this process, Jensen referred to in an essay he wrote in 1997. He called this emergenesis. And the way emergenesis works is you have things coming together that produce a phenotype with emergent properties which are wholly unexpected. So that's what emergenesis is. And he argues that this is due to non-additivity. So where you have these traits which have to come into linkage first and give rise to these discontinuous breaks phenotypically. They give rise to these people or individuals with levels of traits which are totally different from anything that came before, essentially. So you have rare individuals made up of rarely ever found in one person genetic variants, where those genetic variants are sort of gelling in such a way that's giving rise to a particularly amazing phenotype. Now here you have something that group selection can act on. Because even though that individual, we know from historical data, we know from the data of Dean Keith-Simonton, who published a paper on this in 2003, that historically geniuses have enjoyed very, very low levels of fertility. I believe I read somewhere that across all of the eminent men who have been recorded by sundry researchers, like Charles Murray, who's a whole list of them, he wrote a whole book on them, the TFR, the total fertility rate, I think was 0.3, something like one child for every 3 of them. So very, very low rates of fertility. And what this means is that the genius, not only do they not procreate through passing their genes on, but the nature of what they are prevents them from being able to do that. Because when they marry somebody and have children, those co-adapted or those rare gene combinations will break up in such a way that means the offspring are likely to regress to the mean very quickly and are not likely to end up as geniuses. So how does the genius pay for themselves fitness-wise? Well, what they need is they need to come from a large population that contains high frequencies of the various traits that go into creating that phenotype. So this might include a form of otherworldliness. This is a term Bruce Charlton uses. These people are not connected or concerned with material things. They tend to just be concerned with learning and sort of post-materialist pursuits, often to the exclusion of sort of material concerns. You might also have a situation in which they have to have very high IQ, plus a tilted ability profile. Plus, they have to have high levels of certain personality traits that make them risk-taking, but not too risk-taking. So there's also a kind of altruism might need to be present that make them very willing to sort of sacrifice themselves for the good of whatever big idea it is they're working on. And of course, the benefits to that could be huge if it's a big idea that has major payoffs at the level of the groups boosting their competitive success. So the way the genius is paying for himself is through his output. And his output is raising the corporate fitness of his host group. So innovations in map making, for example, from Mercator and these other geniuses, were giving the ability for empires to mark out new territory, to spread, and to increase their biomass that way. Innovations in weapons design, like Tartaglia, for example, who calculated ways of estimate better aiming cannons by measuring flight, the arc of the parabola of the cannonball in flight. That gave his lot a huge edge over rival city-states in terms of being able to actually aim the cannon right and being able to kill large numbers of the opposing number. So when the group expands, the raw ingredients for genius will also increase in number. Because the more genes you have, the more likely it is you're going to get more of these genetic variants, and the more likely it is you're going to get rare combinations of these genetic variants. So that's how the genius is paying for themselves. They need to increase the size of the pool of raw material that goes into their creation. And if it's a low probability thing, if it's negatively frequency dependent selected, they need a much, 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 much bigger pool in order to increase their frequency, given that there is an opposing pressure, i.e. individual level selection against them having children, which will reduce their numbers.
Do you recall what was the source for the Simonton paper? Do you recall the
yes, it was. I have the reference somewhere which I can dig out. But he found, consistent with what Francis Bacon also noticed in the 16th century, Francis Bacon noticed that geniuses tend not to have very many children. I'll actually see if I can get you the exact quote there, because it's quite interesting.
I entirely agree, of course, with Usi Sumitar's comments that Finland works so well because it doesn't have many geniuses or many retarded people. That's entirely true.